The purpose of this video is to show you how to download and install MySQL on your computer. The website you want to go to is mysql.com, and then at the top you'll notice there's a link here that says Downloads. Now, when you first get to the site, it'll show you all their enterprise and commercial editions. The one that you want is at the bottom, the one called MySQL Community Edition. You want to click on the Community GPL Downloads link. The next page, it'll start with the community server, cluster, and so forth, but the one that you actually want, if you scroll down, is you'll see MySQL on Windows. Click this. On the next page, we want the MySQL installer. Now, if you were actually using this in a production environment where you already had a MySQL server set up, you could download the connectors and the workbench and so forth. You could download those separately. But we want the installer that has all the utilities to install MySQL. And if you keep scrolling down, you will see here that we have the MySQL installer, and it has the version 5.7.11. The version number may change, that's okay. But what you want to notice is that down here at the bottom we have two different installers. One of them is 1.6 megabytes in size, and the other one is 377 megabytes in size. This is the one you want. This is the full installer. This one's kind of deceptive because when you download it, you get this little web-based installer, and then it turns around and downloads everything else. So you want the bigger one, you want the second one, go ahead and click download. The next page you get to says begin your download, and it says you have to log in or sign up, but if you scroll down it says no thanks, just start my download. And then it will ask you where to save it to. So you go ahead and just save it. And then once you save it, then you just simply run it like any other installer. Now the installer for it, when you go through the installation, it's going to ask you some things that you need to go through during the installation process. After MySQL installs, you'll be presented with what's called the workbench. And the workbench looks like this. So what I have is a list of all of my MySQL servers. You'll see that I do have a local server, and I also have my local computer here. I'm going to start with the server. When you log in the first time, what it's going to do is it's going to bring you up to the query editor. It actually allows you to do your edits, all of your queries and everything from here. So the thing is that if I try to open these up, it'll ask me to log in the first time. And during the installation process, you had to set a password for what's called the root account. And so whatever password you used, you will have to type that in unless you tell it to save it in your keychain. Alright, so when I log in, I will see tabs up here for each of the servers. So this is my local computer, this is the one that's on the server. And I have queries that are open here, so I'm going to close those. I don't need them. Alright, so what I have is on the side here, I have management capability, and then I also have what's called schemas. And schemas will have a list of all of our databases that we have, and for each database that we have, we can expand these. We can see the tables that we have. Each table that you look at, you can look at the columns. And you can actually see, for this particular one, actor ID is our primary key. It has first name, last name, and some of these will have constraints on them. So it does show this information to you. But what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and create a new database specifically for our eatery database. Alright, so to start with, I want to actually create a database table. So I'm going to create a database, and we're going to call it the eatery. Okay, so that's just simply going to create the database. You'll notice that it didn't show up over here, but if I refresh, now you'll see the eatery. It does not have any tables to it. So by default, that's all that we get. Alright, so we want to create our company information. So we're going to create that company info table. So we're going to create a table, and we're going to call this company info. And then what we need to do is we actually need to list all of the particular values for this thing. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to open a set of parentheses here and then close this. So now what we're going to do is inside of here in the parentheses, we're going to list all of the particular columns that we need. Alright, so we're going to make an ID column, and this is going to be an integer column. Maybe it's 1 character in length because we only have one company, which would basically allow us to have the numbers 1 through 9. Alright, so if I had 9 possible companies here, then I'd want to make it longer. Alright, so I need to make sure that this is not allowed to be null. So we're going to say not null. And essentially what this means is that this particular column has to have a value. If it doesn't have a value, then we won't allow it to be written. Alright, so then the next thing we're going to have is the name of the company. And this is going to be a character data type, and I don't necessarily know how long it is. Now the problem is that the character data type would say that whatever you type in has to be the exact number of characters in length. So instead, I'm going to use what's called a varchar value. And varchar says that it can be any length up to a certain amount. And typically what we'll do is we'll allow it to be up to 255 characters in length. And we're going to say that it's not allowed to be null. The next thing that we're going to create is and actually, name is a reserved word, so we're going to call this company name. All right, so anyhow, the next thing we need is our address. And this is once again going to be varchar up to 255 characters in length, not null. We're going to have a telephone number, which is going to be varchar. Now, the reason that I'm doing this is because our telephone number is going to have dashes in it. And yes, it's a 10-digit telephone number, but we include the 2 hyphens in there, so we're going to allow it to be up to 12 characters in length. And once again, we're going to make it not null. We're going to have a website, which is varchar up to 255 characters. Now, that'd be an awfully long website name. Now, the thing is, if our company hasn't actually created a website yet, we may not have a domain name. So therefore, we don't necessarily need to have the not null. We can allow this one to be null. Let's see, we want to do things like city, and that's going to be a varchar up to 255 characters, not null. State, which is varchar. Now this is going to be a 2-character, so we're going to make it 2, not null. And we're going to have a zip code. Now our zip code, we're going to leave this as a varchar also because our zip codes could be 5 digits, dash, and then 4 more digits. So we're going to make this up to 10 characters in length, not null, and so forth. Okay, so now what this will do is this will allow us to create our table, but I haven't specified what the primary key is. So to specify the primary key, then after my very last column, I'm going to create another row here, and I'm going to say primary key, and then in parentheses, what do I want to be the primary key? Well, ID is going to be the primary key. All right, so now what we're doing is we're creating the table. Here's the table name. Each column, we specify the name, the data type, and whether or not it's allowed to be null. And then at the very end, we specify which of these columns is going to be our primary key. So run this, and actually, we got an error message here, and it says no database is selected. Okay, so now what I need to do is I need to specifically select this database. So what I can do is I can either put a use command up here, or if I come over here and I double click on the eatery, it makes this one the default database. So now if I run it, now it has created it. All right, so I'm going to refresh this. Now what we'll see is that we do have a table here called company info, and it does have all of our columns in it. And if I click on company info, I can see these are all of ours, and ID is our primary key value. So we've now created our first database table. We've created all the columns, and so now we have the basic layout for the database. I want to show you one more type of creation. So we're going to create a table for our employee type. So we're going to call it create table, and we're going to call it employee type. Okay, so our employee type table had some columns to it, and so I'm going to make my basic layout here. All right, so what we had was an ID, and our ID here is going to be an integer data type, and that's going to be, let's say, up to 10 characters in length, so we could have up to 99 different data types. And we're going to say that's not allowed to be null. All right, so then the next thing we're going to do is we're going to have a description, which is the actual name for the position or something like that, which is going to be a varchar up to 255 characters, once again, not null. We're going to have things like maybe a pay scale or things of that nature, but we're just going to leave it like this for now. So we just simply have an ID and a description, and I do want to list that we have a primary key, and our primary key is going to be ID. And so this is our table. We go ahead and create it. All right, so then we have our table. If I refresh over here, I will now see that I have employee type and company info. All right, so now the employee type is important because what I want to do is I want to specify that we're going to have an employee table. And our employee table is going to have things like our first name, last name, address, telephone number, so forth of all of our employees. and then also the employee type. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to make a table called employee, and our employee is going to have some columns. Now you notice that our ID column is the same, our primary key is the same. Maybe we want to have the possibility of up to 1,000 characters in length, so up to 9999 could be possible. All right, so what we're going to do is I want to specify things like first name. That's going to be a varchar, up to 255 characters in length, not null. They'll have a last name. That's varchar, up to 255 characters in length, not null. Let's see, we'll have birthday, and actually we can do that, birth, date, and then this is going to be a date type, not null, so we don't want it to be null. Let's say we want to know their pay rate, so how much they're making. Now this is a decimal amount, and what we do with decimal is how many values in front of the decimal point and how many values after the decimal point. So we can make it 3 values in front of the decimal point, comma, and then 2 after the decimal point, not null, which means that we can have something like $999.99 is possible for their pay rate. Maybe that's an hourly rate. We can do things like when they were hired and so forth. But what I want to actually do is their employee type. Okay, now what I'm going to do is the employee type, this is going to be an integer data type of up to 10 characters in length, once again not null. And essentially what we're doing is we're specifying that the employee type is an integer data type. Now this has to match what we actually specified over here. So if I look at employee type and I look at the columns, if I look at ID, it was 10 characters in length, integer data type. This has to match. The reason for it is we're going to make a constraint. And our constraint is going to say that this particular column here references this column over here in the employee type table. So the way that we're going to do that is we're going to add another thing. So after primary key, we're going to say foreign key. And what is the foreign key? All right, this, the foreign key is employee ID, or employee type. Okay, and what does that reference? Okay, that references the employee type table, and then in parentheses, what column does it reference in that particular table? All right, so what this does for me, so what this does for me is it says that our primary key for this table is ID, but employee type is a foreign key that points to another table. What table does it point to? It points to the employee type table, and then over here in the employee type table, it points to the ID column. And what this is going to do is it's going to force a constraint, so that way when I try to write something, if I specify an employee type and I enter an employee type number, then that employee type number has to exist over in the other table, or else it will not actually allow me to write that particular record. Now when I run this, I am actually going to get an error, and the error that I get is that our ID column is maximum 255. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to change this to 255 and then run it, and it will allow me to create it. So what I've done is I've created another table here called employee, and if you scroll down, you'll see that employee type is bold. And what that means is that this employee type has a constraint on it, and the question is, what is it? Well, it's a foreign key, and the foreign key of employee points to the employee type table ID column. So what we're doing is we're specifying that this particular relationship has to exist to be allowed to create this employee. If it doesn't, it will not allow you to commit this data to the database. Now these are the basic structures for creating your database. We do have to create a database. We create the tables. Then once we create the table, we have to specify our primary key and foreign key, which means it's very important to have this information ahead of time. Now there is a way to enter this information later. Like if I want to add a foreign key, what I can do is I can alter a table. I can do something like alter table employee, and I could add a foreign key and specify what the column name is. So let's just say column name, just so you know what it is there. And then we could do something like references. So the same thing where I added foreign key when I created the table, we can always add it in later if we forget it, but to do that we'll have to do an alter table. And so it's the exact same command. So references, employee type, and then whatever column name over there that we want to reference. So we can do the same thing with a foreign key or even a primary key. We can add it after the fact, but it's much easier to create it and add these foreign keys and primary keys when we're creating the actual database. So your job is to take your database design that you made for the eatery that's in DBDL, implement it in MySQL, and then once you implement it in MySQL, what you're going to do to actually submit this to Blackboard is you're going to export your database. All right, so to do that, we're going to come back over here to this Management tab, and then what we have is the ability to do a data export. And if I go to data export, what it will do is it will allow us to select the particular database that we want. So I want the eatery, and we're going to dump or actually create a backup of the eatery database. Now you'll notice it says objects to export. We're going to export stored procedures, events, triggers. We don't have any of those. We just simply have our database and our tables. There's no data in it yet. We just have the structure. But what I want to do is I want to export it as a self-contained file. And then the self-contained file, we're going to do this as a single transaction, and we also want to include the create schema. What this would do is it would allow us to take this file, double-click on it on another computer, and it will automatically build this database on another computer. All right, so what I want you to do is I want you to rename this file. You'll see here right now it calls it dump and then has today's date. What I want you to do is type your last name underscore the eatery. And that's what I want you to save. So you're going to save this as an export file. And you'll notice it automatically saves it under your documents and then dumps. So when I start the export, it will export everything. And it is exported. And so now what I want to do is I want to go to documents. So documents, then we're going to go to dumps. And then here's my file. If I actually open up this file with Notepad++, let me just a second, open on the other screen. Okay, so here's that file. What it actually did was it created all of the SQL statements that are necessary to rebuild that entire database. And it will drop tables if they exist. It'll recreate the table. All of the stuff that I typed in to actually build that table, it will type those all out. And like I said, all I have to do to put this back in, if a .SQL file extension is associated with MySQL, it will automatically rebuild that database for me. And if there were data in there, we would actually even see more information because all of the data that's in that database would be here. So MySQL makes it really easy to export the data, set it up so that it can automatically recreate the entire database on another computer and get all that information back in. This .SQL file is what you're actually going to upload to Blackboard for credit. So you have two parts. One is the Word document that has your DBDL in it. Make sure you list all your foreign keys. Make sure you list all your primary keys. And then the other thing you're going to upload is your .SQL file, which is the SQL export showing that you did create the whole thing in MySQL.